police report simply stated missing person, but what they didn't include was the trail of unexplained photographs found in her abandoned cabin, or why local residents refuse to hike those woods to this day. What I discovered while investigating this case still keeps me awake at night. Before we begin, I have to warn you, some viewers who watched my investigation last month reported strange occurrences in their homes afterward. If you're sensitive to unexplained phenomena, you might want to watch this during daylight hours. Blackwood Forest stretches across nearly 40,000 acres of dense woodland in the Pacific Northwest. Its towering pines create a canopy so thick that even on the brightest days, the forest floor remains in perpetual twilight. Beautiful, yes, but with a troubling history. Since 1952, 17 people have vanished without trace in these woods. Local authorities attribute most disappearances to exposure, wildlife encounters, or hikers simply becoming lost. But the circumstances surrounding some cases defy conventional explanation. Rebecca Klein became the 17th person to disappear in Blackwood Forest on October 12th of last year. A 28-year-old award-winning wildlife photographer known for capturing elusive animals in their natural habitats, Rebecca had rented a remote cabin for a 3-month project documenting the forest's endangered spotted owl population. Her credentials were impeccable: a master's degree in environmental photography, exhibitions in galleries across the country, and a reputation for methodical preparation. Her friends and family described her as level-headed, practical, and extremely safety-conscious. She had no history of mental illness, no financial troubles, no relationship problems that might explain a sudden departure. When Rebecca missed her weekly check-in call with her sister for the third consecutive day, authorities conducted a wellness check at her cabin. What they found confounded them. The cabin was locked from the inside. Rebecca's vehicle remained parked outside. Her expensive camera equipment sat untouched on the kitchen table. Her phone, wallet, and identification were still in her backpack. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of forced entry. Rebecca Klein had simply vanished. But the authorities' report omitted one crucial detail. Strange geometric markings had been carved into the walls of every room. Markings that, according to the local historical society, bore unsettling resemblance to symbols found at other disappearance sites throughout the forest's history. If you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain while in remote locations, share your story in the comments below. I first learned about Rebecca's disappearance through a colleague at the documentary network where I work. I specialize in investigating unusual missing persons cases, particularly those with unexplained elements that conventional investigators often overlook or dismiss. After researching the basics of Rebecca's case, I traveled to Millridge, the small logging town that borders Blackwood Forest. Population 2,147, according to the faded sign welcoming visitors. The town appeared frozen in time, wooden storefronts with peeling paint, a single traffic light swinging in the autumn breeze. My first stop was the local diner, where I hoped to gather preliminary information before approaching officials. The reaction when I mentioned Rebecca's name was immediate and unmistakable. Conversations halted. Several patrons abruptly paid their bills and left. The waitress, who had been friendly moments before, suddenly became tight-lipped. "We don't talk about forest business in town," she told me quietly, refilling my coffee cup. "You should leave it alone. For your own good." Sheriff Thomas Harrison proved equally reluctant when I visited his office later that afternoon. A tall man with weather-beaten features and eyes that seemed to have witnessed more than they wished to remember. "Miss Klein's case remains open but inactive," he stated flatly, refusing to meet my gaze. "We conducted a thorough search. Sometimes people just want to disappear." When pressed about the strange markings reported in the cabin, the sheriff became visibly uncomfortable. Graffiti, he dismissed. Probably done by local teens before she even arrived. It wasn't until I mentioned having newspaper contacts ready to question his department's handling of the case that Sheriff Harrison reluctantly granted me access to the basic case files. "Nothing sensitive," he assured me, "just the preliminary reports." Among those files was something remarkable: photocopies of several pages from Rebecca's journal, which had been found on her bedside table. The sheriff had included them as evidence of her deteriorating mental state in the days before her disappearance. The journal entry started normally enough, but what she began documenting in her final week defies rational explanation. Rebecca's early journal entries revealed an experienced photographer excited about her project. Her writing was clear, methodical, and focused primarily on her work. September 15th. Spotted a pair of owls approximately 200 yards north of the cabin. Their nesting behavior suggests their permanent residence rather than migratory. Weather conditions perfect for shooting, overcast but bright. Captured nearly 300 frames. Reviewing footage tonight. September 21st, fourth consecutive day of rain. Using the downtime to organize files and prepare equipment for clearer conditions. The isolation is peaceful. No cell reception means true focus on the work. Made contact with ranger station via satellite phone as scheduled. All systems normal. But by early October, a subtle shift began to appear in Rebecca's writing. Her entries grew longer, more detailed, and increasingly concerned with elements unrelated to her photography project. October 3rd, something unusual today. While reviewing yesterday's footage, noticed the anomaly in the background of several frames. At first I thought it was lens flare or a processing error, but it appears in the same position in multiple shots from different angles. A tall, thin shape at the edge of the clearing. Almost rectangular but with strange proportions. Not a tree. Going to return to the same location tomorrow with different equipment to investigate. October 5th. The shape wasn't there today, but I felt observed. I've worked in remote locations for years and am familiar with the sensation of wildlife watching from concealment. This was different. More focused. More intentional. Spent 3 hours in the blind but captured nothing unusual. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No bird calls. No rustling. Even the wind seemed to stop. October 7th. Woke at 3:17 a.m. to sounds outside the cabin. Not animal movements. Something methodical. Almost like footsteps but with an irregular rhythm. Too precise for branches in the wind. Recorded the audio but caught nothing unusual on playback. Started photographing seemingly empty areas of the forest where I feel the watching sensation is strongest. We'll develop these specifically for anomalies. Rebecca's photographs from this period started as normal wildlife documentation, but gradually shifted to seemingly random shots of empty forest sections. Upon closer inspection and digital enhancement, these images revealed subtle distortions, areas where the natural patterns of light and shadow seemed to bend in ways that violated normal physics. In several images, there appeared to be elongated shapes just barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest. Present in the frame, but somehow resistant to being properly captured by the camera lens. Most disturbing was a series of night shots taken from inside Rebecca's cabin, pointing out various windows. She'd used long exposures, capturing the moonlit forest beyond. In the third image of the series, a faint outline appears to be standing directly outside the glass, though it resembles no human or animal silhouette I've ever seen. Looking at these photos, do you notice anything in the background? Some viewers have reported seeing different things, and I'm curious what stands out to you. After reviewing the case files, I obtained permission to visit Rebecca's cabin. The forestry department was reluctant but eventually granted access on the condition that I would be accompanied by a ranger at all times. However, upon arriving at the ranger station, I was informed that my escort had called in sick. Rather than postponing my investigation, they provided me with a key and directions, advising me to return before sunset. The cabin stood in a small clearing approximately 3 miles from the nearest accessible road. A simple structure, 1 bedroom, a combination living room and kitchen, and a cramped bathroom. Large windows designed to maximize natural light for a photographer's needs. The atmosphere inside was oppressive. Despite being uninhabited for months, The air felt heavy, as though the oxygen content was slightly lower than normal. The ranger had mentioned that they'd cleared out most of Rebecca's personal belongings, returning them to her family. What remained were only items considered too insignificant to collect: a few cooking utensils, basic furniture, and some technical photography books. The markings on the walls remained, however, carved directly into the wooden panels with what forensics had determined was a standard hunting knife found on the premises. The symbols formed no recognizable language or pattern I could identify. Geometric shapes interconnected by thin lines, creating configurations that seemed almost mathematical in their precision. While examining the bedroom closet, I noticed a slight irregularity in the floorboards. Pressing down revealed a loose board concealing a hidden compartment. Inside was an SD memory card that had been overlooked in the official investigation. When I inserted it into my laptop, I found dozens of additional photographs not included in the case files. These images were far more disturbing than those I'd seen previously. Extremely close-up shots of the wall markings illuminated by unusual angles of light. Nighttime photos of the forest with strange light anomalies floating between trees. And most unsettling, a sequence of self-portraits showing Rebecca over several days, with each image revealing her becoming progressively more gaunt, her eyes developing dark circles, her expression increasingly haunted. The final images on the card were taken at unusual angles, as if the camera had been hurriedly set up to capture something specific. They showed ordinary sections of the cabin interior but with subtle distortions in the corners of the frames, elongated shadows that didn't correspond to any visible objects casting them. Rebecca's final journal entries, which I found hidden between the pages of a photography manual, revealed a rapidly deteriorating mental state. October 9th. The sounds come every night now. Always starting at 3:17 a.m. exactly. Always lasting precisely 12 minutes. I've started marking the walls to create a barrier. The symbols come to me in my dreams. I don't know what they mean, but I feel compelled to carve them exactly as I see them. October 10th. It knows I'm documenting it. The camera captures only fragments, like it exists partially in another spectrum of light. Today I felt it inside the cabin while I was developing photos. Not physically present but somehow occupying the same space as me. Overlapping. The air became cold in specific patches that moved around the room. October 11th. The symbols are a map. Or a key. I understand now why the others disappeared. They found what waits in the center of the forest. Or it found them. Tomorrow I'm going to follow the pattern to its source. If I don't return, know that I went willingly. Some knowledge demands sacrifice to obtain. This was her final entry. Rebecca disappeared the following day. What I found hidden behind the cabin's false wall changed everything I thought I knew about this case. While examining the symbols more closely, I noticed that one section of wall sounded different when tapped, slightly hollow compared to the surrounding areas. Careful inspection revealed a seam nearly invisible to the naked eye. A false panel, expertly installed. Behind this panel was a small alcove containing materials that had clearly been missed during the official investigation. A collection of local historical records, printouts of newspaper articles dating back to the 1940s, handwritten notes, and a hand-drawn map of Blackwood Forest with specific locations marked in red. Rebecca hadn't come to the forest simply to photograph owls. She had been researching the history of disappearances in the area, meticulously documenting patterns that local authorities had either missed or deliberately ignored. Her notes revealed that she had become fascinated by local folklore surrounding an entity referred to as the Watcher in the Woods. According to legends documented in the personal journals of the region's early settlers, the Watcher was described as an ancient presence that had existed in the forest long before human settlement, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but fundamentally alien in its nature and purpose. Rebecca had connected the disappearances to specific astronomical events, periods when certain stars aligned directly over the center of the forest. She had calculated that these alignments occurred in 12 to 15-year cycles, and each cycle corresponded precisely with clusters of disappearances. More disturbing were her discoveries about previous victims. In 3 separate cases from 1952, 1967, and 1982, individuals had gone missing under circumstances identical to Rebecca's: locked rooms, no signs of struggle, and strange symbols carved into nearby surfaces. In each instance, the missing person had been researching previous disappearances in the weeks before they vanished. It formed a chain of investigation, with each new researcher picking up where the previous one had left off, only to become part of the very phenomenon they were studying. Most revealing was Rebecca's analysis of the symbols themselves. By comparing photographs from different disappearance sites over the decades, she had determined that the symbols weren't random. They formed a progressive sequence, a communication system slowly evolving over time. Rebecca believed she had partially decoded their meaning. According to her notes, the symbols represented a form of invitation or summoning. Each researcher who investigated added new symbols to the collective pattern, unwittingly contributing to what Rebecca described as the opening of a door. When I arranged Rebecca's final photographs in the sequence indicated by her notes, they formed a disturbing pattern, not just visually but conceptually. Each image contained a fragment of information that, when mentally assembled, created an impression of something waiting just beyond normal perception. Something ancient. Something patient. Something that had been gradually working its way into our world through the minds of those who studied it too closely. The most disturbing discovery wasn't what happened to Rebecca, but what she apparently invited into that forest. As my investigation progressed, I began experiencing anomalies similar to those Rebecca had documented. It started subtly, the unexplained failure of recording equipment when attempting to document certain areas of the cabin. Digital artifacts appearing in photographs that couldn't be explained by equipment malfunction. The constant sensation of being observed from just outside my peripheral vision. During my 3rd day examining the cabin, I set up automated cameras to record overnight while I returned to my motel in town. The footage they captured defied explanation. Between the hours of 3:17 a.m. and 3:29 a.m., the exact time frame Rebecca had noted in her journal, unusual light phenomena moved through the cabin. Not reflections or lens flares, but autonomous points of illumination that behaved with apparent intelligence, hovering over the symbol-marked walls as if reading them. Most compelling was my discovery of Rebecca's final video recording, stored on a cloud backup service referenced in her notes. The video showed Rebecca sitting calmly at the cabin table, speaking directly to the camera. "I know how this will appear to anyone who finds my research," she began, her voice steady despite her haggard appearance. "That I suffered some psychological break. That isolation affected my mind. That's the rational explanation. But rational explanations fall apart in Blackwood Forest." She went on to describe her intention to follow the symbolic map she had decoded to a specific location deep in the forest, a clearing where, according to her calculations, all the previous disappearances ultimately led. "What waits there isn't dangerous in the way we understand danger," she explained. "It doesn't wish harm. It wishes understanding. Communication. For thousands of years, it has been reaching out, but our minds aren't structured to perceive it properly. The symbols are a translation mechanism, a way for our limited consciousness to gradually adapt to something much vaster." The final minutes of the video showed Rebecca preparing a backpack with minimal supplies. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. She spoke of going to meet it with an unsettling combination of fear and reverence. The recording ended with Rebecca looking directly into the camera one last time. "If you're watching this and feeling drawn to follow, be certain. The threshold can only be crossed once." When analyzing the audio from this recording, I discovered something Rebecca herself may not have been aware of. In the background, almost imperceptible without significant amplification, were sounds that audio experts later confirmed could not have been produced by any known animal species. Rhythmic patterns that neurologists I consulted described as potentially capable of inducing altered states of consciousness if heard directly. As I concluded my 4th day of investigation, I experienced equipment failures of increasing severity. My laptop crashed, losing several hours of notes despite redundant backup systems. My phone recorded only static when attempting to document audio observations. Camera batteries depleted at impossible rates. Most concerning, I began to see the symbols from the walls appearing in my dreams, exactly as Rebecca had described. I would wake with an urgent need to write down sequences of shapes that made no rational sense to my waking mind but felt profoundly significant while dreaming. It was then I made the decision to leave the investigation site immediately, taking all the documentation I had gathered. During the drive back to town, my vehicle's electrical system failed completely, leaving me stranded on the forest road for several hours until a passing logger offered assistance. The logger, an elderly man who had worked the forest for over 50 years, seemed unsurprised by my experience. "You were at the Klein girl's cabin," he stated rather than asked. When I confirmed, he simply nodded. "The forest chooses some people. Always has. Best hope is it didn't choose you." Rebecca Klein's disappearance remains officially unsolved. Her body has never been found despite multiple search operations covering thousands of acres. Her camera equipment, recovered from the cabin, revealed no conclusive evidence according to official reports. The documentation I gathered presents 3 possible explanations for what happened to Rebecca, none of them completely satisfactory. First, the psychological theory that Rebecca, despite no previous history of mental illness, experienced a psychotic break triggered by isolation and stress. In this scenario, she may have wandered into the forest in a delusional state and succumbed to exposure or injury in an area searchers couldn't access. The problem with this theory is that it fails to explain the precisely carved symbols, the hidden research materials, or the technical anomalies in her photographic equipment, all of which were independently verified. Second, the criminal theory that Rebecca encountered someone or something in the forest that caused her harm. This might explain her disappearance, but not the locked doors, the lack of struggle, or why her valuable equipment remained untouched. The third theory, which aligns with Rebecca's own final testimony, suggests something beyond conventional understanding. That Blackwood Forest contains an anomaly, whether supernatural, interdimensional, or simply unknown to current science, that intermittently interacts with human consciousness. That certain individuals become attuned to this phenomenon, eventually establishing communication through symbolic means, and ultimately choose to cross some threshold of understanding that prevents their return. What makes this case particularly unsettling is how it connects to the broader pattern of disappearances in Blackwood Forest. Since concluding my investigation 6 months ago, I've identified similar cases in 7 other old-growth forests across the country, all featuring the same key elements: isolated locations, researchers or artists as victims, locked rooms, and geometric symbols left behind. More troubling is what happened after I published my initial findings. Local authorities cordoned off Rebecca's cabin citing structural concerns, then demolished the building 2 weeks later. The Forestry Service closed that entire section of Blackwood to the public, ostensibly for wildlife conservation. When I attempted to access public records relating to previous disappearances in the area, I discovered that many had been sealed or, in some cases, appeared to have been removed entirely. Most concerning are the personal effects I've experienced since concluding the investigation. Recurring dreams featuring the symbols. Occasional equipment malfunctions that technicians cannot explain. The persistent feeling of being observed when alone. I've come to believe that simply knowing about this phenomenon in detail might somehow attract its attention, that awareness itself represents the first stage of contact. There are 3 main theories about what happened to Rebecca. I've shared mine, but I'm curious which you find most plausible: supernatural entity, elaborate hoax, or something else entirely? If this investigation kept you on edge, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next in my ongoing research into the unexplained. I've been documenting strange occurrences like Rebecca's for years now, and there are patterns emerging that connect these cases in ways I never expected. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. What theory about Rebecca's disappearance makes the most sense to you? Until next time, remember, sometimes the unexplained should remain that way.